Canada is dependent. Canada will fold. Canada always folds. That was the assumption. Not spoken out loud, never spoken out loud, but baked into every threat, every tariff, every pressure campaign Washington has run for the last 14 months. It was the foundation of the entire strategy. The unspoken premise behind every ultimatum. The reason the White House kept escalating, because they believed, at the core of everything, that Canada had no real choice but to take it. This morning, that assumption collapsed. Publicly. Completely. In real time. Canada didn't fold. It fired back. And Washington is still trying to figure out what just hit it. Here is what happened. The White House announced enhanced inspection protocols at every major northern border crossing. Careful language. Bureaucratic language. But strip it down and the picture is immediate. 40,000 trucks cross that border every day. Average crossing time, 15 minutes. Under the new protocols, 3 to 4 hours per vehicle. The border doesn't officially close. It just stops moving. And a border that stops moving is a border that's closed. For every practical purpose that matters, for every factory floor, every assembly line, every supply scheduler trying to figure out where their parts are, it is closed. The White House expected panic in Ottawa. They expected Canadian business leaders flooding Carney's phone within the hour. They expected the same playbook that has always worked: apply pressure, watch the other side crack, claim victory. Mark Carney had a different playbook. And Washington had never seen it before. 45 minutes after the announcement went public, Carney was at a podium. No notes. No teleprompter. No visible anger. Just a document that had clearly been prepared long before this morning, because what he announced next was not improvised. Not even close. 4 countermeasures. Each one more precise than the last. First, Canada is invoking emergency provisions under CUSMA. Legal experts have already confirmed the clause is airtight. Every enhanced tariff Washington has applied to Canadian goods over the past several months is now subject to formal neutralization proceedings. The legal clock started the moment Carney finished the sentence. Washington's tariff architecture, months in the making, is now being dismantled in real time through the same agreement Trump once called his greatest trade victory. Second, every federal contract held by an American company operating in Canada is under immediate 60-day review. Construction firms, technology providers, defense contractors. If a Canadian or allied alternative exists, the contract gets terminated. The value runs into the billions. Not threatened. Under active review. Starting now. Third, and this is where energy markets moved, Canada is invoking export licensing requirements on crude oil shipments to the United States. Every single shipment now requires individual government approval. Canada sends 3.8 million barrels of crude south every day. Heavy crude. The kind Gulf Coast refineries are physically engineered to process. Those refineries cannot switch to Saudi or Venezuelan crude overnight. Their configurations don't allow it. And every barrel now needs Ottawa's permission before it moves. Fourth, the move that made the room go silent. Canada announced it is fast-tracking formal trade discussions with the EU, Japan, and 3 Gulf states simultaneously for energy and resource exports. And Carney confirmed that Pacific pipeline infrastructure to redirect Canadian crude away from American markets Infrastructure that Washington assumed was years away has been under quiet development for the past 12 months. He closed with one sentence. No drama. No raised voice. Canada did not choose this confrontation. Canada prepared for it. The chamber stood. Every party, including the opposition that had criticized Carney the week before. But before we go further, understand the theory of the case that broke this morning. Because the White House didn't stumble into this. They planned it. They were confident in it. And every step of that confidence was built on an assumption that turned out to be completely wrong. The assumption was dependency. Canada sends 75% of its exports to the United States. Nearly $3.6 billion in goods and services crosses that border every single day. The border is the single largest bilateral trade relationship on the planet. Washington looked at those numbers and saw a leash. If you control the border, you control Canada. If you control Canada, you get the trade terms you want, the mineral access you want, the compliance you want. The problem is that a leash works in both directions. Washington controlled the border this morning. It slowed it. It jammed it. It turned a 15-minute crossing into a 4-hour queue. And in doing that, in pulling that leash, it discovered that the other end wasn't attached to Canada. It was attached to Detroit. Now let's talk about what Washington just did to itself. Because this is the part the White House did not model. Those 40,000 trucks sitting in 4-hour queues right now, they are not carrying Canadian products into America. Most of them are carrying American products that need Canadian components to exist. The average North American vehicle crosses the border 7 times during its production cycle. 7. A stamped steel panel crosses into the U.S., returns to Canada as a painted component, crosses again as an assembled unit. Every one of those crossings is now sitting in a queue that stretches for hours. Detroit is the top port on the entire northern border, 21.5% of all commercial truck traffic, over 1.3 million trucks per year. Ford, GM, Stellantis. Their assembly lines do not run on inventory sitting in warehouses. They run on parts arriving on schedule, hour by hour, from both sides of the border. Parts that were supposed to arrive in 6 hours are now arriving in 10. Buffers disappear. Lines slow. And if this holds 48 hours, lines stop. That is not a Canadian problem. That is a Michigan problem. That is an Ohio problem. That is a Pennsylvania problem. And those are the exact states where the 2026 midterms will be decided. The American Petroleum Institute has warned for months that Canadian crude is not interchangeable with other sources. Gulf Coast refineries were built to specification for heavy crude. Retooling them is not a weeks-long project. It is a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar undertaking. The moment Canadian crude flows slow, American refineries run at reduced capacity or pay spot prices for sources their equipment cannot efficiently process. The National Association of Manufacturers has put the number of American jobs directly dependent on Canadian supply chains at over 2 million. Not Canadian jobs. American jobs. Assembly workers in Michigan. Parts manufacturers in Ohio. Steel processors in Pennsylvania. Washington aimed this weapon at Canada. The barrel was pointing the other way. The international reaction came fast, and it came from the wrong direction entirely. The European Union issued a statement supporting Canada's right to invoke customer protections and expressing concern about unilateral disruptions to integrated trade infrastructure. Brussels is watching. Brussels is taking notes about what American partnership looks like under pressure. Japan's foreign ministry pointed directly to the new Canada-Japan Strategic Partnership, signed in Tokyo just days ago, and its commitments to supply chain resilience. The UK, Australia, and Mexico followed within hours. None of them backed Washington. All of them backed Canada. This is the country that organized a 54-nation coalition to address global supply chain security, now watching every ally in that coalition quietly align with the neighbor it just choked. Canada is not isolated. America is. Trump has 3 paths. None of them are good. All of them hurt more than they help. Hold the enhanced inspections and wait for Canada to break. It won't work. Within 48 hours, American auto plants experience parts shortages. Within 5 days, lines start shutting down. Republican members of Congress from Michigan don't survive that at a town hall. The Chamber of Commerce, the NAM, the auto CEOs, silent this morning, not silent next week. And they won't be directing their anger at Ottawa. They will be directing it at Pennsylvania Avenue. Because the workers going home from factory floors in Michigan don't blame Canada for their missing parts. They blame the decision that stopped the trucks. Walk it back quietly and call it temporary. The problem is that Carney's countermeasures are already moving. Customer proceedings started. Contract reviews are underway. Licensing requirements on crude are active. Walking back the border measures doesn't stop any of that. And doing it now means doing it visibly. It means blinking first, on camera, in real time. Escalate further. More restrictions. Higher tariffs. More pressure. This is the option that feels strongest from the inside. It is the most dangerous from the outside. Because every escalation accelerates the Canadian pivot that Washington fears most, and that pivot is permanent. Supply agreements signed with Japan and Europe don't get torn up when Washington eventually softens. They run for decades. Every step up the escalation ladder is another step Canada takes away from American dependency. Permanently. There is a fourth option. The one the administration was built to never take. Except that this confrontation has no good outcome on the American side. Open a real channel, and negotiate. Not with ultimatums, not with pressure tactics, but with the recognition that Canada is a sovereign partner with real leverage and the infrastructure to use it. Carney has said clearly what real talks require. The border measures come down first. Then the conversation begins. Washington moves first. Washington blinks first. Nobody in Washington thought Canada would do it. But here is what Washington missed. Canada wasn't deciding whether to do it this morning. Canada decided 12 months ago. The customs legal architecture was already drafted. The Pacific Pipeline development was already funded. The Japan partnership was already being negotiated. The EU frameworks were already in progress. The contract review process was already designed. Carney didn't walk to that podium to react. He walked to that podium to execute. The trucks are sitting at the border right now. 40,000 of them. Carrying auto parts and steel and the components that keep American manufacturing alive. Sitting in queues that stretch for hours. Washington thought it was squeezing Canada. It squeezed itself. It squeezed Detroit. It squeezed its own supply chains, its own refineries, its own factory floors, and handed the other side a counter-strike that was ready before the ink dried on this morning's order. 2 hours ago, the White House thought it was delivering a knockout blow. 2 hours later, it's the White House on the ropes. And the man standing across from them didn't blink, didn't panic, didn't improvise. He just opened the folder he'd been carrying for 12 months and read from it. Washington does not have a clean answer for that. Not today. Not tomorrow. And the longer this goes, the worse those answers get. Because here is the final thing Washington missed. The thing that changes everything about how this confrontation ends. Carney is not trying to win a news cycle. He is not trying to humiliate an administration. He is not playing for today. He is playing for the structural relationship between Canada and the United States over the next 50 years. Every day the border stays jammed. Canadian companies accelerate their conversations with European buyers. Every week the crude licensing stays active. Asian refineries evaluate long-term Canadian supply contracts. Every month the customs proceedings move forward. The legal architecture that governs the entire bilateral relationship shifts. These are not reversible moves. They are foundational ones. Washington can back down tomorrow morning and call this a negotiating tactic. But the supply agreements being discussed in Tokyo and Brussels and Riyadh right now, those don't go away when Washington backs down. Those get signed. And a Canada that has signed long-term supply agreements with Japan, Europe, and the Gulf states is a Canada that is permanently less dependent on American market access. Not because of ideology. Because of math. Trump wanted leverage over Canada. He may have accidentally built the infrastructure that eliminates it permanently. The trucks are at the border. The queues are growing. The lines in Detroit are slowing. And in Ottawa, the folder is still open. Washington does not have a move that doesn't hurt. And right now, for the first time in this entire confrontation, it knows it.